Meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. Does anybody wish to make a public comment? Anybody wish to make a public comment? Any public comments? If not, we'll move on to the minutes of the May 11th meeting. What are your wishes?
To approve.
Moved by Gibbs, second by Leahy. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Educational presentations, outcome monitoring reports, American Rescue Plan updates, and with an emphasis on the public engagement process. So Lance, do you want to give us an overview of all that you've learned?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you that were on the Wisconsin Counties Association call earlier this week, this will be a very, this will sound very familiar, but it will be far shorter than the discussion we had at the Wisconsin Counties Association. So in short, again, just to recap, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, there are four general broad categories of eligible expenses or costs that we are able to utilize those funds for under the Act. One is to respond to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 or its negative economic impacts. Two is to respond to workers performing essential work during the public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers of the county. Three is for the provision of government services to the extent of reduction in revenue. And the final category is to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. Now, the guidance from Treasury, U.S. Treasury, was released. That guidance is referred to as the interim final rule from U.S. Treasury. It's 151 pages in length. There was a link provided in previous county board materials to that summary, and it is very detailed. In essence, one of the real pieces of information that we are still going to work to develop really centers around that third bucket, that government, for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue. So I believe I discussed this previously at a meeting of this committee, but in essence, what the Act does is it allows for a methodology to calculate from a baseline year, which is 2019, the revenue growth that the county has been receiving over a previous 3-year period. And to the extent that the county has experienced a reduction in revenue below those otherwise average revenue growth that it would be anticipating, your ability to utilize the American Rescue Plan Act funds is given what is referred to in the guidance as wide latitude. And Wisconsin Counties Association, specifically Dale Knapp from the Counties Association, provided a bit more explanation as to how that is going to be calculated. But in short, Wisconsin Counties Association is working to create a worksheet to assist individual counties in calculating that reduction in revenue based on initial work done by Dale Knapp from the Counties Association, working closely with La Crosse County. Based on initial work that they've done, they expect a significant number of counties to be able to utilize the majority of their American Rescue Plan Act funds under that third bucket, that for the provision of government services to the extent of a reduction in revenue. So it's a very important calculation that we need to move forward. I will say, as a county, Christy and her team are working to put together a group of finance experts, not only from within the finance department, but also within our larger service departments, to bring together the expertise to really dive into this act, The good news, we have a lot of time. Again, this act, the funds need to be encumbered by the end of 2024. That said, we do want to make sure we understand what that calculation looks like with respect to reduction in revenue. I'll also say with respect to wide latitude under that third bucket, there are still some guardrails on our spending, and primarily there are three. We can't use the American Rescue Plan Act funds to pay debt service. We cannot use the funds to pay any settlements or judgments. And we can't use the funds to create what was referred to on the Wisconsin Counties Association call as, or characterized as rainy day funds. So there nevertheless remain guardrails, even if we fall within that third bucket for the provision of government services to the extent of a reduction in revenue. But that is really going to be an important area for us to dive into. And if you look on the guidance, you're really starting on pages 131, moving forward. And one of the real things we're gonna need to make sure we really understand, all counties across the state of Wisconsin, are the definitions provided within the act, and primarily those on page 133, which include intergovernmental transfers. So all those definitions really lend themselves to understanding what our reduction, if any, in revenue really looks like, and then that informs, of course, the amount of funds available under that wide latitude scenario. The other piece that I think is again, something we'll need to look at, when you look at make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband, the act, as it relates to what investments, particularly as it relates to water and sewer, again, what are the guardrails on those available or eligible projects? They really work they direct you to the Clean Water Act. So we're gonna need to look at the Clean Water Act as one of the informing documents for the county moving forward. The Counties Association, as we've talked about here, really emphasize the need for counties to take an intentional, informed approach, focusing on those projects that really provide a significant return on investment for the county. You want to be intentional with the way that we utilize these funds, not only to respond to the pandemic, which is absolutely critical. Again, that's the intent of these dollars, but also the way that we spend them, excuse me, to spend them in a way that actually decreases over time the operational cost borne by the county, and then really to avoid those projects that actually come with long-term operational costs. We want to focus on one-time projects that provide that return on investment. So that's the high-level overview again of the act. I believe, Mr. Chair, then you want to discuss about the need for or the desire to have a public engagement process for the public to engage the committee or the committee engage the public with respect to the funds made available to us.
But I think that the act gives us the ability to, again, take a look at how this community was impacted and try to address the issues associated with fighting the pandemic into the future, but also trying to make life easier for those that continue to be impacted by it, whether they're unemployed, underemployed, and others. So I think we have the ability to look at and work with the business community. So what we were hoping to do today, and the city of Wausau already began the process of engaging the public in looking at what are those eligible activities. Again, recognizing that they're one-time dollars and our ability to sustain funding beyond 2026 is limited with the need to commit them by 2024. So You know, I've reached out and had some preliminary discussions with the chamber, and I know that McDevco's done some surveys of businesses. We've got some needs for us as a county that will be ongoing, that this will be the source of funding for the health department and others. But what sort of public engagement process would you envision? I would think that we might want to have some potential hearings around whether they're in person or virtual, to get some of that feedback as we continue to both understand the ramifications of how we can spend the money, where they can, where it can be spent, what the conditions are. I think there's provisions that would allow some of these investments in economic development. There are still concerns about the federal law allowing it, but the state attorney general's opinion limiting it. So I think we continue to need to search for clarification on what we can and can't do. But I open it up for anybody's thoughts as to how we might engage the community and how we might collaborate with others. You know, the area of broadband has been pushed. Milt Olson, the town chairman from the town of Weston, is strongly encouraging towns to pool their money with the county to look at in making significant investments in broadband expansion and others. And how do we go about capturing those thoughts and comments, and how do we advance this in a meaningful manner? And while being cautious is good, being too cautious puts you. I think we have to be thoughtful and in our approach to make sure that we've got a plan in place for at least portions of the funds sooner than later, but be wise in how we do allocate those. So, any thoughts on how we proceed? Kurt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, not necessarily a particular thought on this issue, but I think what light was shed on the condition that the American Rescue Plan, and one of its conditions was the reduction in lost revenue, was that calculation is critical. That gives us, meaning Marathon County, the biggest latitude. But I think the other part of that is because, as it was stated on the Monday call, out of 51 counties in the state, they've estimated that the vast majority of those 51 would be able to utilize up to 90% of the American Rescue Plan revenue or dollars under the reduction of or reduction in revenue. And that then equates into the question, is that same calculation true for the townships? So does that limit the potential opportunity that the townships would have? I haven't had those discussions with town representatives yet as to whether or not they've had these calculations, but I think what we were initially suspecting, that they wouldn't be able to utilize a lot of these funds that they are getting allocated, which now may be a assumption that was premature and may allow them greater latitude for use of these funds under the lost revenue section. So because if the WCA calculation is correct and 90% of the allocation to 51 of the counties is usable under the lost revenue, I would suspect that might hold true in a lot of the townships also. So there may not be the availability of dollars to be shared with multiple municipalities on broadband expansion. I bring it up for discussion only, but I think you're spot on. We need to get we need to have these clear understandings of the guidelines that the American Rescue Plan put on, so that, but we also need to engage the public.
Let me just point out that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and while the lost revenues may result in creating some more flexibility in terms of how we spend the money. It's still important that we look at making the best investment possible and look at return on investment and how we can strengthen the community. So I think that the message would be, are these investments sustainable? Are they worthwhile? And in the long term, will it put us in a better place than we were before? So the lost revenue discussion is important from the context of flexibility, but I think we still need a plan on how do we move forward and how do we engage the public in that process. So any other thoughts?
John, this is Craig.
Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you. I don't know what the discussions are with some of the townships, but would it be possible to, at the next Eastern and Western Towns Association, to have a discussion there? Just a thought to get them to start thinking about it.
It was raised, it was already raised by Milt Olson at the Eastern Towns Association meeting, and I raised it at the Western Towns. So we've planted the seed, but when the issue was raised, it was premature because we still hadn't seen the guidelines from the Department of Revenue at that time. So I think it would be an excellent idea for their July joint meeting to perhaps have Lance and others go through and look at it. One of the, just laying cards on the table, one of the concerns that I've had, that we've had some discussions in internally, is that if we're going to look at broadband expansion, there's so many dollars coming into broadband, we want to be careful that we not use the allocation to the county to in areas where we could capture other funds, but we also want to be careful that we position ourselves to get the work done within the timeframes. And there's a concern that with the dollars coming in, it may stretch the resources of those people that are engaged in constructing the fiber setup or the towers, et cetera. So you'll want to get involved a little bit early if we were, for instance, wanting to partner with LTD and Charter Communications, which were awarded grants by the Federal Communication Commission under the Rural Development Opportunities Fund. We'd want to be trying to work with them early to accelerate their expansion of broadband in areas. So there's a lot of work that we need to do, and we need a lot of people providing input into what other opportunities are there so we can make the best use of dollars that are out there. But I think going to the towns is an excellent idea. There are others. I know McDevco's been doing surveys, and Lance, you participate in those meetings on a regular basis. I've had a brief discussion with Dave Ekman. He thought the PPP was handling a lot of the needs of businesses. We don't know what other needs there are, if there are some that are flying under the radar, that their survival is still in question. Are there opportunities for us to partner with the city of Wausau on certain projects and with other towns on projects that are targeted toward helping those businesses, and what can we do? So other thoughts? Would you be open to having, as the city had a public hearing and there were a number of people that came in and advocated for housing. I'm not sure that it's an eligible expense. It was 2 days after the rules came out, but there were a lot of very thoughtful suggestions on how investments could be made. I think we have to temper those with what's eligible and not. But is there a desire to maybe start with one hearing, see how that goes, what sort of feedback we get, and then move on? And what sort of timing? Is that something we want to do during the month of June, early July, to sort of begin the dialogue with community partners?
John, this is Craig.
Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you. I know it was probably a year and a half ago when we had that discussion with people on the eastern and western parts of the county that had no cell coverage. They had no phone ability because of Frontier, and no broadband. Is there, I mean, it's pretty broad picture, but is there anything in there that we could use to, and I haven't heard if these issues have been resolved or not, but if there'd be any relief in there for, we could use some of those funds for that.
The provisions specific to broadband are for 100 megabytes, synchronized 100 megabits of service up and down, which would be difficult for a lot of people to provide, but there's also a backdrop of 120, 100 down, 20 up. So it would be much broader than what the Public Service Commission and FCC are currently using. But there are opportunities for us to look, and we've had and are continuing to have discussions with others. There's $100 million that'll be available, federal dollars through the Public Service Commission come. The application process begins June 1st through, I think, July 27th. We'll be monitoring that. There were, the Rural Development Opportunity Fund grant was awarded to Charter and LTD, two companies received awards for a significant portion of the county. Charter received $1.2 billion nationwide, and LTD 1.3. They've got 4 years to get to 40% and 10 years to get fully implemented. There's concern that that's an eternity in terms of expanding coverage, and we've had continued interest from other internet service providers, including Bug Tussle and Wittenberg Telephone, on expanding services in the area. So there are lots of things that we can do, but the Charter LTD service area would address many of the areas that were identified, Craig, in that March meeting that we had last year, when the concerns were over Frontier's phone lines and DSL lines deteriorating because of age and moving ahead. So we can coordinate that, but there are other sources of money that we can also leverage.
Thank you.
Kurt?
As I see it, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I see it, I think there's two potentials. One, is engaging the general public and the business community, and then a separate engagement with municipalities and how we can partner together so that we collectively have the largest economic impact on the county moving forward. So I think there's potential for two different, because I think those discussions are potentially different. But I would be supportive of setting up utilizing the public engagement model, and what are we asking? Are we asking for their input? Are we asking them, do we have a plan? And then, like I said, I think there's two different potentials for those discussions, one being the public in general and including the business community, and then separately the municipalities.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts? Why don't we, for the next meeting, then develop a proposed schedule for doing that? I would think that we may want to have some communication with the local governments, indicating that we are looking at this and encouraging them to coordinate and cooperate. And then we can have a more detailed presentation for the Towns Association's annual meeting. And then we can begin to work through Vicki Resich at McDevco and Dave Ekman at the Chamber, and maybe, I don't know if we want to reach out to the Marshfield Chamber for that part of the county to see if they have some thoughts on how we can coordinate with them. And then there are a number of other organizations, such as United Way, which we're heavily involved, that we may want to engage as well going forward. But we can look for that discussion at our next meeting with the schedule. And then I would hope that we do this June, July-ish in terms of the input and beginning the process and that engagement process. And we can frame that and bring that back at the next meeting, if that's acceptable.
Chair Robinson, Supervisor Fisher here.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I'm very much in support of that idea. I think that's a good way to present in order to garner the most possible amount of ideas and input, you know, bringing in the other organizations like the Chamber and the United Way, and then reaching out to the towns on, you know, east and west towns, you know, if they want to send a, you know, a delegate or a participant, you know, so they just, you know, we're getting some feedback or potential input from them. So in June, July, just to kick the process off right away, I think that's a great idea.
And I would, again, reiterate that there's a difference between local governments and the Towns Association. So we would want to be careful that we reach out to the incorporated communities as well, which are sometimes participate, but many times don't in the town. So we would, the assumption is we reach out to the towns at that meeting, but we'd also probably do some separate and independent work with incorporated communities.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts? All right, thank you. If you have thoughts, please let us know. Thank you for the overview now. Next item, we're going on to 5 operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution. B, discussion and possible action forward to the county board on intergovernmental budget transfers. Christie?
All right, on your county board packet for tonight and from Thursday, you did have intergovernmental budget transfers, but what happened between Thursday night's county board meeting and tonight's is that the federal government provided us our first tranche of the American Recovery Act state and local coronavirus aid in the amount of $13,178,290. So I need to put it somewhere. Connie Beiersdorfer, treasurer, actually has it safe and sound for us. But we need to have a budget transfer. And so simply this budget transfer is to recognize the revenue and the expense, which is not being spent. So we put $100,000 in for other professional services, just so in case we need to develop some kind of program, and the rest is sitting in a capital equipment new, which cannot be spent unless there's a capital project attached to it. So we needed a place to put it, and it's where it's going to be so that we can receipt it and record it appropriately for our books. And as you'd heard earlier, it's very specific on the expenditures that can happen with it. So it's just arbitrary at this point until we have a much better developed program. But that budget transfer is in there and been included in the meeting for tonight, but it needs to go through this committee first. And the second one, our medical examiner, Jessica Blahnik, had a grant, and the money is currently sitting in her pathology account, but she is working with facilities and capital management to get a more refined space needs study completed, and that she will be moving that money from her pathology account to a already established project called morgue and emergency needs. And so those are 2 additional budget transfers that will be in the packet for this evening. So we need those to go through this committee, and they're already incorporated in the meeting packet for tonight.
Are there any questions?
And the health one is in there, and that was approved by this committee on the 11th.
So we need action specific to the 2 new items, the American Recovery Funds Act and the morgue space study. What are the wishes?
Motion to approve interdepartmental transfers.
Is there a second?
Second by Star.
I think it was Fisher. It was, so we'll move by Gibbs, second by Fisher. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 That motion carries unanimously. Review the Marathon County Procurement Code, discussion regarding possible amendment or repeal and creation of new code from the last meeting.
Lance, the packet has the updated code, if you can share it.
All right, my live here. All right, what's that? I'll give it a try here. Okay, that doesn't have the changes in it though.
Oh, will you go, Lance, go through and find packet one, I've updated it. So go back out to calendar, go back in.
So first of all, I'll acknowledge that this could have been cured if I had gotten the revised version into the packet earlier than 3:59 p.m.
It's in there.
Today. It's there. So hopefully, if you hit refresh, you'll
Yeah, you have to.
get a
go back
packet that
into
has
the
this.
Go back into the appointment, and it's now listed as packet number 1. On page. Here you go.
Is this going to work better if I come up there? Yeah. Okay. Again, my apologies for, in my last act before this committee, violating the rule regarding providing you materials in a timely fashion.
Is there a citation or something that we could issue?
Yeah. So last time I was here, we kind of went through some talking points, and what I promised was a version of the procurement code that would make these talking points essentially come true. So what you're looking at on your screen is a revised procurement code. And I do have some things that I'd like to highlight for you because I think there are things that we're going to need to work through with this. I don't present this as a finished product, asking you to vote on it today. There are certainly some things that need to be considered about how we're going to go forward with this. So, but very easily, with respect to the first provision that you see here on page 1 is we're going to expand how this policy is used. It used to say supplies, services, and construction, and to be honest, the piece about construction was very confusing to me because this procurement policy purported to be applicable to construction, and it didn't mention public works at all. And there were definitely some issues with respect to compliance with public works law under 660901 that we hadn't been following with respect to this procurement code. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to get clarified off the bat, that we're using this for materials, supplies, equipment, permanent personal property, miscellaneous capital, and contractual services. And there are some issues regarding construction and possible use of our bidding process. But what I want to emphasize going forward is that public works contracts that involve that statutory definition, essentially construction, remodeling, or revision of any public property in the hard concrete sense qualifies as a public work, and that is subject to different rules than just our procurement code. Our former code said that you got outside of this code if you were purchasing from another governmental entity or you were using funds from a different governmental entity. Those things are true, but it didn't provide for the possibility that there were other superseding statutes, and so we need to make sure that that's clear. So we talk about what we're using this for. We talk about the use of federal or state funds. Obviously, when that happens, then any federal or state law that applies that regulates the use of those funds is going to apply to the purchasing or the purchasing transactions. Public Works is in there. Other terms and conditions is in there. What you see in black is what the ordinance used to be. My changes. The screen I'm looking at is blue. I don't know if you see it as blue or red, but so then we get to the parts that I really talked about in terms of talking points last time. State and local and state government purchasing. There's a large body of law that's developed over the idea of local and state governments purchasing things together, as well as purchasing services and entering into intergovernmental agreements for the joint exercise of powers and purchasing. And so this version then goes on to establish that as part of our procurement code, and it deals with it in terms of applicability of the code. What it says is essentially you don't have to go through the elaborate procurement process if you are purchasing goods and services from another governmental entity. That's sub 5. Sub 6 is the cooperative purchasing. There are quite a number of consortium. Choose your Latin pronunciation. I learned it in high school as consortia. If you're talking about the plural of consortium, so I tend to say that. But there a large number of those have developed where you have states, you have other municipalities involved. And what we've begun to do is to look at what the pricing is that these consortia have developed as a base price for our procurement, rather than going through the bidding and the request for proposal. Now, the caveat to that, and you've heard me talk about this before, is that vendors will look at what the consortium price is, and then they'll say, hey, but I'll offer you 1 percentage price off the consortium price. So it doesn't necessarily do away with competition to do things this way. And so I think that that's a value judgment. What this does is it permits purchasing agents to purchase through consortia. And I think that that's a realistic thing for you to permit. But perhaps an additional caveat there regarding it may be in the best interest of Marathon County to continue to require competitive bids, even though consortium is possible. Mr. Chair, do you have a question?
Toward that, could we use the consortia price as a de facto bid when comparing and evaluating others? If we were to go in and hypothetically, if we were to look at trucks.
Sure,
And the
yeah.
truck is we had ABC bids at 25,000 and the consortia was at 24. Can we consider the consortia price as a bid, or would we require the submittal of formal documentation of that?
I think you can require it as a bid because those are typically published.
Okay, so you could accept it as a bid.
Right, right. Are you suggesting something along the lines of an abbreviated procurement, though, if you can record that you have used this consortium bid as your base, and then have been offered a different price that's off of that, and that needs to be recorded and provided? I'm just throwing that out there.
I was trying to pick up on your line, you're using the consortia, and then do we incorporate bidding? Because consortia is the consortia going to submit a bid, or they've got fixed prices?
They got fixed prices. It's usually published. You go to a website, you look at the publication for the truck.
But if you
and see
were,
what it says. Yeah.
okay. But if you were to, could you say the lower of the consortia price or the bid in your documents as a way of
I think
ensuring?
you could do that, and you could document that, yeah. But I think it reflects the reality of the marketplace these days, and much better than the previous code did. Sub 7 is what I'm calling reverse procurement, and this is all Scott Corbett. It's been my policy that when purchasing agents call and tell me they want to get rid of surplus property or used property, how do we do that? And so what I've said is, well, it's still a Marathon County asset. It's still something that is valuable to Marathon County that we are electing to dispose of. And how do you want to, if somebody asks you what you've done, how do you want to respond to that? And I think you want to say, we either took bids or we did some kind of reverse procurement to look at the value that the market would place. We do put a lot on surplus property, though, and it's sold at public auction, and we've been very successful at that. So I think that's very transparent, and it abides by the spirit and principles of the code regarding disposing of property. There's one more sentence here, though, that I want you all to take a look at. That's under sub 7, and it says, no Marathon County officer or employee or immediate member of their family may purchase or bid on property being disposed of by the county. And this has been more of an unofficial policy since I've been the corporation counsel and before, where people call and they say, hey, there's a really great chainsaw out there, and I wanna bid on it. And we've said we're gonna avoid any appearance of conflict by saying no, Marathon County employees are ineligible to purchase surplus property. And we've held the line on that, but people have said, well, where is that written, Mr. Corbett? And I have said it is not. but we don't want to be in a position where Marathon County employees are setting aside things for them to privately purchase. And so I think this or something like it would be a good idea to have in the procurement code, because then successors of mine can say it's written right in the procurement code. So, but again, like I said, that sub 7 is all me. So take that for what it's worth. I'm going to scroll through the definitions here. There are a few additional definitions that I think we should add to that and maybe take out. But the next talking point that I want to talk about is under section 3.04, and I've added that. We talked about this last time. There are a couple of instances in the procurement code where it says purchases over $20,000 have to be approved by the finance committee and or the administrator, and certainly that is not something that we have abided by in my tenure. I don't believe it was abided by in the tenure of either of my successors, it certainly is not something that is workable in today's marketplace. What we have gone to, and again, what we functionally look at is what I have written in paragraph 2 sub B that talks about budget limitations. And again, this is my wording for this, but I think it's something that needs to be articulated in some manner. Purchasing agents for this county shall have the authority to enter into purchasing transactions within the limits of their respective departmental budgets and in conjunction with authorized capital improvement program expenditures. Now, again, that's how I chose to express that, because I think there's departmental budgeting, and then I think that there's capital improvement project, and my understanding is they kind of work together. But if my office was buying a large software piece or something, that wouldn't be sitting in my departmental budget. That'd be part of the CIP or KIP procedure. So again, choose how you would like that to be expressed. But that was my stab at it. Any purchasing transaction or other acquisition of property not specifically budgeted is subject to county budget amendment procedures. And again, that is not written anywhere, and I think it should be. So I'm asking that you consider adding that to this. Then I'm scrolling down to competitive sealed bidding under that's 305 sub 1 sub F, and that's where that sentence that says in purchases over $20,000, the county administrator and the finance and property committee shall approve the purchasing decision. So if every purchasing decision above $20,000 was coming to y'all, that would be, I don't think, very workable. So I think we need to better express that, and that was my attempt above. Small purchases, and this is 305 sub 3, and this is what started it all, because we've had this policy since probably 1998 that set the dollar amounts at 30,000 and 10,000, and investigation of this has learned that, or has disclosed that the federal government has, and the state of Wisconsin have other limitations that they live with. Most notably, the state and the federal, though, talk about what they call micro purchases under $10,000, and that seems to be a very consistent dollar amount for us to stick with in terms of an abbreviated purchase procedure under $10,000. So I think that needs to be held on to. But the upside of what are called minimum, is Dan on the line? Dan, what's it called when you get between 10,000 and 250,000? You didn't answer. Okay. Anyway.
Scott, this is Brian, Griefy Seaway.
Do you have an answer for that?
I do. I believe that's difference under 10,000 is micro purchase, and then between 10 and 20 small purchase provisions in federal code.
Small? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So, there was requested some flexibility. Right now, the state of Wisconsin has 75,000. There was some discussion about 75,000 with an escalator to 80,000 over the next couple of years. I think that this committee should consider an $80,000 number rather than setting an escalator clause. Because that's gonna mean every year it's gonna change, and you can do that if you decide that would be best, but I think that a solid number, certainly in my experience, works better. You just tell everybody what it is, and if they need to look it up, they look it up, or they look on your website and they ask you. So that's the upper limit of small purchases. But as we indicated, the federal government has what they call small purchases between 10,000 and 250,000. And there are several groups that would like to have the flexibility above and beyond 80,000 because they are regularly making purchases for services or goods that are above $80,000, and those being the airport and most notably the healthcare center. So what I tried to draft here in this paragraph is that independent boards created by intergovernmental agreement pursuant to 660301 that are responsible for managing Marathon County property may pass measures increasing the amount of money, and I would end that qualifying for small purchases. And I think that is a possible compromise with respect to how to deal with those other folks, because they're not Marathon County departments. We want them to follow our procurement code. We want them to comply with our standard procedure so that we can monitor what's going on. But we want to be able to give them some flexibility within the jurisdiction that we've already ceded to them by joining a joint agreement. Again, this is just a proposed compromise. But I think what we want to do is have some flexibility. You notice I didn't put that at the beginning of this procurement code saying, hey, other boards can modify any provision of this that they want to, because I think that takes away the advantage of having a standardized procedure. So I put this only under the small purchases process so that we could give them some flexibility. So and we'll finish up that sentence, but I want you, what I want you to really think about is whether or not we want to go down this road. And again, my recommendation is that where you have these other autonomous or semi-autonomous boards that are responsible for a specific jurisdiction, and they're doing things that we want them to do. We want them to comply with our standardized process, but we want to also give them some flexibility.
Is there a top end on that, Scott, if we're talking about small projects?
We could say, well, if you want to go with the federal, you could say no, but no greater than $250,000.
I think there should be a cap on that for transparency and accountability. So whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So especially the airport and the healthcare center, they get federal money, so they would have to comply with that provision anyway. So we let them up to the maximum that the feds permit. We could say it that way. Or you could, I'll write 250,000 in the next version that you're gonna see, and then I'll put a question mark, or
Yeah.
what I like to do is put, like we did with the metallic mining thing, in brackets. Here's where you get, here's where the decision point is.
Yeah. So that means you're coming back?
Well, someone is.
Oh, soon they forget.
Yes. So there were a few other things that I deleted here. You can take a look at. There's the long process regarding cost or pricing data. That's really required if you're going to do federal or state procurement. So again, the old version of this code said, well, if you're going to be using federal or state money, you have to comply with their provisions. But then they went in and elaborated on those federal provisions, which are now outdated. What I give you is a version that just says, if you're using federal or state funds, you must comply with federal or state requirements, without having the elaborate thing there. But obviously, sub 9, cost price analysis, a contract funded in whole or in part by assistant federal or state agency, cost price analysis as appropriate shall be conducted. So I think that's all you need to say. Sub 10, I think this is 306 sub 10, design build contracts are also those kinds of contracts that are prohibited.
Is that under statute?
Boy, I would be hard pressed to find that under statute. I know it's under case law, and I know that by contrast, I think we're not authorized. I think the way it is we're not authorized to do that, whereas I know that school boards are, because there are standard models for school construction. So they allow design build in the school board world, and there may be others as well, maybe hospital, but I know that we're not permitted. That's what I know.
So we couldn't take a bridge, for instance, and do a design build? And you think that case law versus statutes?
Right. And again, the idea is there's no check and balance if you have the designer building it, they cut corners, and you wind up with a defective bridge. So
Even with third-party oversight?
well, then you have to trust who the third-party oversight is. So. Section 13 that had to do with lease options. I am suggesting that we take out the county administrator must agree in writing in advance to the exercise of any option to purchase, because I don't think that this is a provision that we're currently complying with in any way. And I'd rather have it out of there than have a rule that we're not complying with. On the other hand, if you feel differently about that, that's something that you could elect to maintain. That's why we do the red lines, so that you can see what we're talking about. And then again, purchases of used items. Again, there was this idea that if used items were going to be purchased, that there had to be approval by both the finance committee and the or the administrator. And again, I don't believe that that's being complied with. So I'd rather have the provision out of there than in it and not comply with it. Buy American, again, that's a federal contract issue, and that has undergone evolution since this was put in here. Energy conservation, also the same, that's been altered. Then the whole idea of the purchasing agent executing and including in a contract file for a construction contract, a written statement setting forth the facts which will lead to selection of a particular method of construction contracting management for each project. Certainly plans and other materials are certainly available that demonstrate what the different costing was and that kind of thing. Again, I don't believe that a summary like this is being done. Certainly records are kept. I wouldn't advocate that we reduce the amount of records that need to be kept, but requiring something that we're not going to comply with, I don't think is very valuable to the county. Section 309 that has a set of obsolete contract clauses that haven't been used in years. Again, they're not bad in terms of suggestion, but they are certainly not something that Marathon County has complied with for the last 30 years, to the best of my knowledge. We have a set of contract terms which are available, which are on the website, which have been run through this committee previously. So I don't believe that this set of obsolete terms needs to be included. Fiscal responsibility, and this is the last one that I really want. There are some others that are looked at here, but this was the last one that I just wanted to bring to your attention. What it said previously was every contract modification, change order, or contract price adjustment under construction contract with Marathon County in excess of 5% of the project construction cost shall be subject to prior approval by the boards, committees, and commissions or authority after receiving a report from the purchasing agent as to the effect of the contract modification, change order, or contract price adjustment. I don't think that that's particularly meaningful the way things work today. I would elect to say in excess of the total project budget or the total contract budget shall be subject to prior approval, because again, that follows along with the logic that if you're going to exceed what you've been budgeted for, then you have to come back and you have to amend and you have to report. So that was the last really significant issue that I wanted to bring to your attention today.
So you're looking for direction for the next draft, and one of the critical point is the $80,000 threshold, and whether we put a not to exceed in that paragraph and the rest are concurrence. So you're looking for guidance. So are there any thoughts from the committee?
And the limit on the other government. And the other comment was the limit on the other governmental entity purchase being the maximum of the federal small purchase as well. There's no limit on that wording.
Right, I think you meant the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, then I know the minutes are correct, so that's great too.
Any thoughts? Any?
So you're looking for us to concur?
Well, I think we're looking for direction because there's still a work in progress. Does anybody have an objection to, let me perhaps phrase it, EJ, if that would help. Is everybody comfortable with the $80,000 threshold, or are there concerns? Silence is acceptance. And for purposes of discussion, are you comfortable then putting not to exceed $250,000 in that paragraph, consistent with the federal definition of small projects? Kurt?
Question, Mr. Chairman. The question I would have is the, you know, small projects, I understand that's in the federal statutes right now, but does that frequently change? Or do we want it just to state that the upper limit is the federal limit?
Good question. What has the experience been relative to raising that threshold? Brian, I'll ask you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I honestly don't have an exact answer to that. It's been 250,000 for a while, I know, but I don't recall when that was set. Certainly does give some of the other committees some flexibility if getting to that. So to directly answer your question, I don't know, but certainly would support that flexibility.
This is Dan Adzik speaking. So I finally figured out how to unmute myself. So for small purchases and what's also known as the simplified acquisition threshold. So that limit used to be set at 150,000. And they just recently, within the last year, and I would even say this last July, they upped that limit to 250,000. And so for those purchases now that range from 10,000 to 250,000, you don't have to go into formal procurement methods such as RFPs and requests for bids, but you can do so just by obtaining 3 quotes in writing. And that would satisfy the requirement that you need to comply with in order to ensure that you're getting the best price. I think a lot of motivation for this was because of COVID. They wanted organizations to be able to purchase the supplies they needed, especially like in the healthcare industry. So they then moved this threshold from 150 to 250,000. They got a lot of positive comments as a result, and so they decided to make the change permanent.
Lance is looking at the Federal Register. It looked like that was effective August 31st, 2020. So pretty recent.
So it's a recent change, so it's not likely to go up in the foreseeable future. So the question is are you more comfortable with tying it into the federal standard, or do you want an arbitrary number in there?
I would though point out we hadn't revised our current procurement code for 40-some years, so I would suggest that we use the federal limit.
That's fine, and I'll put in there currently $250,000 so that there's some base reference for people that come after me.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that approach?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Any other?
Yep, agreed.
Any other questions or concerns about other provisions in this draft? I think we've given you the direction that you needed or asked for. So we would look for a near final or final version at our next meeting.
That should be good.
Presented by?
Question mark.
To be determined.
There you go.
All right, any other questions relative to the procurement code? Any comments? I will ask Brian, others, Jerry? No comments?
None from me, thank you.
John, I can just make one comment about the a number of us have been using those consortium purchase opportunities. What I find is that they generally negotiate really good prices, and you can get, the state vendor net has a lot of stuff published on there, and then there's a couple of them that are other state consortiums, like there's an out west one, there's a Houston area one. What's interesting is they get good prices, but also sometimes it's interesting is to go after the 1 or 2 vendors that they'll have negotiated a price with for something. In Wisconsin, example on the vendor net stuff, And you can sometimes get them to go below the price that they already committed to, which is already a good price. So I think we want to continue to make sure that we get, use the consortium pricing or beat it if whenever possible. We still want to try to get every penny out of it.
So we'll incorporate language, similar language in the draft?
Yep.
Any other comments, questions? If not, we'll look for that at the next meeting. Next is the approved City-County Information Technology Commission updated intergovernmental and new operating agreement client. This is before us because I raised the issue of whether this needed to go to a standing committee last week. And Scott opined that it probably didn't, but rather than leave it to chance and needing a 2/3 vote, we thought we'd bring it here, and Chair Pfifferich and I have had a discussion about whether it should go through infrastructure or HR finance. In light of the timing, it was decided that it would come here. So with that, well, Jerry?
Okay, so the City County IT Commission's been around for 42 years, and it's had a surprisingly minimal amount of governance documentation. So, are you scrolling through it right now? Is that what you're doing? Okay. The main change that we made with the intergovernmental agreement was the City County IT Board has recommended that we go from 2 community board members to 1. And also, we clarified language that we thought sort of existed in, it should have existed that didn't exist, which said that whenever the intergovernmental agreement really ought to be approved by the 3 entities that own City County IT. So that's the city, the county, and North Central Healthcare. So that's the process that I'm going through this week. It's on the agenda for City Council tonight. It's on the agenda for County Board tonight, and it'll be on the agenda for the next NCCSP meeting. The other thing we did was we created an operating agreement, which is Exhibit A in the intergovernmental agreement, and what that covers is some financial structure that wasn't codified before. And it also calls out that we will maintain a service level agreement, which I have, but which the City County IT will continue to maintain. And then also on the agenda tonight is the appointment of a new citizen board member. The 2 citizen board members we've had, Pat Pillart's been on there for 13 years, and John Tubbs has been on there for 8 or 9, and both of them declined to renew. Any questions on it?
Are there any questions? If not, a motion to recommend to the county board would be in order.
Supervisor,
Fisher to make that motion.
Supervisor, I think it was Supervisor Zhang. And is there a second?
Fisher to second.
Second by Fisher. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, policy issues, there are none. Our next meeting is June 8th. Our action meeting. Any other announcements? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Moved by Gibbs, seconded by
McEwen.
McEwen. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you all.